Hello and good morning friends, welcome to the CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, with 28th lecture in series on microeconomics, today we would be talking on factor pricing. In the first half we would be discussing on theories of wage determination, whereas in the second half we would be discussing on classical and neoclassical theory of rate of interest. And for this very discussion we have once again with us in our studios Dr. Kamlesh Gakkar. Dr. Kamlesh Gakkar is a professor in Institute of Management Studies and Research, Maharishi Dayanand University, Rohtak. Dr. Gakkar has more than 3 decades of teaching experience. A number of her articles have been published in reputed journals both at national and international level, as well as she has written numerous books. So let's welcome our guest Dr. Kamlesh Gakkar and let's try to grab maximum knowledge through her experience as well as from all what she is going to teach today. Hello ma'am, welcome to the EduSet lecture.
Hello Nitika, thank you. Dear viewers, today I am going to tell you about the theories of wage determination. A theory of wages explains the determinants of wages, and various theories have been put forward from time to time to explain what determines the wage rate. So we will be studying about some of the theories. One theory is the subsistence wage theory. This theory was first propounded by the physiocrats in 18th century. In France and other countries of Europe, physiocrats witnessed near starvation conditions of laborers, and later on some classical economists also supported this theory. Socialists attacked the capitalist economic system on the basis of this theory. Karl Marx developed his theory of exploitation of labor on the basis of this theory. According to this theory, wages are determined by a natural law, the operation of which necessarily brings them down to the level of the bare necessities of life. So, according to this theory, wages are only which are required for the subsistence level of living of workers. If wages are more than the subsistence wages, then the workers multiply their population, their number increases, and due to increase in the supply of labor, wages will come down again to the subsistence level. And if the wages are less than subsistence level, then due to hunger, many workers will die, leading to fall in the labor supply, which will further lead to increase in the wage rate, again becoming equal to the subsistence wage rate. So, according to this theory, in the long run, wages will tend to be equal to the subsistence level which is necessary for their minimum standard of living. This was also called the iron law of wages by the German economist Leslie. Now, this can be explained in the form of a figure also. In figure 1, we have taken labor units on x-axis and on y-axis we have shown the wage rate. OW is the subsistence wage rate, and at this wage rate the long run supply curve of labor is perfectly elastic. So, LRS is parallel to x-axis. If demand curve is D1 D1 or it is D2 D2, the wage rate will remain same. So, this shows that demand has no effect on the wage rate of labor. But this theory was criticized on various grounds. In 18th and 19th century, wages in various countries were stabilized at the subsistence level on account of the steadily growing supply of labor, which could not be easily absorbed in the productive activities. In many overpopulated, underdeveloped countries of today, wages in some sectors particularly agriculture, continue to be very near the subsistence wage. However, in other economies and for other sectors of these economies, wage rate does not tend to be equal to the subsistence level. It is based on the wrong assumption that population and workforce grow in response to rise in wages. In reality, as wages rise and standard of living improves, workers want to have smaller families to maintain their improved standard of living. Thus, increase in wages has a depressing effect on population growth. This theory fails to explain why laborers in different countries and laborers in different regions of the same country earn different wages. Wages differ from occupation to occupation. Wages are different for different categories of the workers at the same place. If this theory were true, the wages should be uniform for all. But we know wage differentials exist in the practical world. It emphasizes mainly the supply side of labor. Demand for labor has been ignored in the determination of wage rate, and it has assumed a static society. While we know that society is not static, rather it is dynamic. So, subsistence theory of wage rate was criticized because it did not take into account what is the effect of efficiency on wage rate, or what is the effect of demand on wage rate, or what is the role of trade unions. So, other theories were developed afterwards. The second one is the wage fund theory. So, just as the name suggests, this theory says that a stock of capital or wage fund is kept for distributing among the workers. This theory was propounded by J.S. Mill. Here the fund was considered to be fixed. Wage rate is equal to the wage fund divided by the total number of laborers. As the wage fund is fixed, with the increase in supply of labor, wage rate comes down, and with fall in labor supply, wage rate increases. So, according to this theory, wage rate depends upon two factors: wage fund and size of the workforce. This theory takes into account both the demand for labor and supply of labor. Demand for labor comes from the wage fund. So, higher the wage fund, naturally the demand for labor will also be high. And on the other hand, the supply side is from the number of workers available. So, if the number of workers available is supposing constant, then with increase in the wage fund, the wage rate will increase, and if the wage fund decreases, the wage rate will also fall. So, this was according to the wage fund theory, but the modern economists don't believe in the wage fund theory. They are of the view that wage fund cannot be assumed to be fixed. The theory does not explain how the wage fund is determined. This theory also fails to explain wage differentials. The impact of efficiency on wage rate has been ignored in this theory. Some economists say that the process of wage determination is exactly opposite of what the wage fund theory states. In fact, wage rate should be determined first, and after that wage fund can be calculated by multiplying the wage rate with the number of workers. Another theory is the marginal productivity theory of wages. According to this theory, wages are determined by the marginal productivity of labor and equal to it at the point of equilibrium. Hiring of labor continues up to the point where marginal product of labor equals the wage rate. This theory is based on the law of diminishing returns. So, we have already discussed law of diminishing returns, which states that as more and more labor is employed, keeping other factors constant, marginal productivity of the labor goes on declining. So, according to this theory, if the physical productivity of labor is high, labor should be paid higher wages, but if the physical productivity is less, then labor should be paid less wages. And in the long run, wages tend to be equal to the marginal productivity of labor. But this theory has also been criticized on various grounds. It considers only the demand side, because when we are considering the marginal productivity, that is the demand side. So, supply in this theory has been assumed to be constant, or we can say supply side has been ignored. Actually, it is only a theory of employment and not a theory of wage determination, because wages are determined by the intersection of demand and supply in the industry, and every firm sees that this wage rate is equal to the marginal revenue productivity of labor. But actually, wages are determined by the bargaining power of laborers and the employers. If the bargaining power of employer is more, supposing there is only one employer, then naturally he would pay less wages. Then wages are not paid according to the marginal productivity, but rather there is exploitation of the labor. On the other hand, if there is bargaining power of laborer being strong due to the role of trade unions, then they can ask for wages even which are more than the marginal revenue productivity. Here the role of this bargaining power has also been ignored. Then it is very difficult to measure the marginal productivity in case of where the factors are used in fixed proportion, because when factors are used in fixed proportion and if we are increasing only one factor of production, then naturally the marginal productivity of that factor will be 0, and we know that wages can never be equal to 0. So, this theory has been criticized on several grounds, and earlier also when we did the marginal productivity theory of distribution, we have done this theory in detail. Now, we will see how the modern theory of wage determination determines the wage rate. According to the modern theory, just as the price of a commodity is determined by its demand and supply, in the similar way, wages of laborer are also determined by looking at what is the demand for labor and what is the supply of labor. Where demand and supply curve intersect each other, that will determine the wage rate. If demand is more than the supply, then naturally wages would increase, and if supply is more than the demand, then wages would fall, and this has been shown in figure 2. In figure 2, we have taken quantity of labor on x-axis and wage rate is there on y-axis. Demand curve for labor is shown by DD curve, which is sloping downward, and supply curve is upward sloping. Both intersect each other at point E. So, OW is the equilibrium wage rate. If wage rate is kept more than OW and it is OW1, we see here that demand is up to W1A while the supply is up to W1B. With increase in wage rate, supply of labor rises, and this would result in reducing the wage rate to again OW. And if the wage rate is less than the equilibrium wage rate, if it is OW2, now we see that supply of labor is less and demand for labor is more. There is a mismatch between demand and supply by the number GH. This is the excess demand for labor, and this would result in increasing the wage rate to OW. So, we see that the wage rate is determined by the intersection of demand and supply. Now, we will consider the application of this general theory of wage determination under 4 market situations. Number 1 is perfect competition in product market and labor market. Second is imperfect competition in product market and perfect competition in the labor market. Third one is perfect competition in product market and imperfect competition in labor market. And fourth case is imperfect competition in product market as well as in the labor market. Now, we will look at all these 4 cases. So, first is when there is perfect competition in both the markets. Both market means in the product market, when there is perfect competition, there are large number of buyers, large number of sellers, price of the commodity is determined by demand and supply, and every firm has to sell its product at the price determined by the industry. So, in this case, average revenue is equal to marginal revenue, and we know that we will see what is marginal revenue productivity and what is value of marginal product. Value of marginal product is equal to marginal physical productivity multiplied by AR, and marginal revenue productivity is equal to marginal physical productivity multiplied by MR. Because AR and MR both are equal, so in this case value of marginal product would be equal to marginal revenue productivity. And when there is perfect competition in the labor market, this means the wage rate is also determined by the intersection of demand and supply, and every firm will adjust the employment at this wage rate. So, every firm will see to it that this wage rate is equal to the marginal factor cost, or you can say marginal factor cost is marginal wage. So, AW is equal to MW. Wage rate will be the same, it is not going to change in the present, whatever the case may be there. Once it is decided, we have to see that marginal wage is equal to the marginal revenue productivity. So, this is shown in figure 3. On x axis we have shown units of labor, on y axis we have taken wage rate and marginal revenue productivity and value of marginal product, and VMP is equal to MRP, and this goes on declining because of the operation of law of diminishing returns. So, VMP and MRP are same, and because of the perfect competition in labor market, AW is equal to MW. This is the average factor cost as well as marginal factor cost. Now, equilibrium is where this marginal factor cost becomes equal to the marginal revenue productivity, and MRP is cutting MW or MFC from above. So, E is the point of equilibrium. So, OW is the wage rate and ON number of laborers are employed. If the number of laborers employed is less, if supposing that is ON1, in this case what would happen? MRP will be greater and wages would be less. So, it will be profitable for the firm to employ more people and reach at point E. and if the employment is up to ON2, in this case we see that marginal wage is more than MRP. So again there is a loss to the firm, so equilibrium will be only at E where MRP is equal to MW. This was the wage determination in case where there is perfect competition in both markets. Now the other case is of when there is monopolistic power in the product market, but there is perfect competition in the labor market. So when in the product market there is imperfect competition, or we can say there is monopoly, in that case AR and MR are different. Average revenue is more than marginal revenue. When AR is greater than MR, naturally value of marginal product will be greater than marginal revenue productivity, or you can say marginal revenue productivity would be less than value of marginal product. But because of the perfect competition in labor market, average wage would be equal to marginal wage, and that will be a line parallel to X axis. So in this case we have shown this in figure 4. Units of labor are shown on X axis, wage rate and MRP is shown on Y axis. WS is the average wage is equal to marginal wage line, or this is the supply curve, and this is parallel to X axis. This is perfectly elastic supply, and MRP is falling downward, and here we have not shown VMP, but actually VMP is greater than it. But naturally the labor is paid according to the marginal revenue productivity and not according to value of marginal product. So here the equilibrium is at E where demand and supply are intersecting. So OW is the wage rate and ON is the number of workers employed. So this is the case when imperfect competition is there in the product market. Now the third case is that when there is monopoly in the labor market and perfect competition in the product market. In monopoly there is only one buyer, and here buyer is the employer in the labor market. When there is one buyer or one employer, in that case average wage is not equal to marginal wage. In this case average wage is rising and marginal wage is above it. So what would happen? That equilibrium would be where marginal wage is equal to marginal revenue productivity, but actual the wage rate paid is only equal to the average wage, which is less than the marginal wage, and this is due to the monopoly in labor market. But in this case we have taken that there is a perfect competition in the product market. So VMP and MRP are the same, but average wage and marginal wages are different. So there is monopolistic exploitation of labor due to the reason that laborers are paid average wages while marginal wage is greater. So the difference between marginal wage and average wage is known as the monopolistic exploitation of labor, and this we have shown in figure 5. In figure 5, labor is shown on X axis and wage rate is shown on Y axis. VMP and MRP are equal to each other, and this is a downward sloping curve, and average wage and marginal wage are rising. Average wage is there, this is the actually supply curve of labor, and marginal wage is above it. So equilibrium is at E where MW is equal to VMP or MRP, but wage rate paid is OW. So what we see here, marginal wage is NE, but average wage is NH. So the actual wage rate paid is NH, and this is less than NE by EH. So this EH part is known as monopolistic exploitation of labor. Now we are considering the final case in which there is imperfect competition in labor market as well as product market. So there is monopoly in the labor market and monopoly in the product market. And we have already seen that if there is monopoly in the labor market, average wage is less than the marginal wage, and if there is monopoly in the product market, AR is greater than MR. That leads to MRP being less than VMP. So in this case, there is two types of exploitation of labor. One is the monopolistic exploitation of labor, and that is there because MRP is less than VMP. So that is the monopolistic exploitation. And on the other hand, due to monopoly in the labor market, which means that there is only one employer, so on that basis also there is exploitation of labor. Average wage is less than the marginal wage. So that is the monopolistic exploitation of labor. So this two type of exploitation of labor is there. So total exploitation is a combination of monopolistic exploitation of labor and monopolistic exploitation of labor. And this we have shown in figure 6. In figure 6, labor employment is shown on x-axis and wage rate and marginal product are shown on y-axis. Average wage and marginal wages are different because of monopoly in the labor market, and VMP and MRP are different because of imperfect competition in product market. So you see here that FG part of exploitation is due to monopoly in the labor market. So this is monopolistic exploitation, FG, and rather it is EG, the lower part is EG, which is monopolistic exploitation, and the upper part EF, that is the difference between VMP and MRP, that is the monopolistic exploitation of labor. So the total exploitation is FG and it is combined of FE and EG. So here labor is exploited due to the imperfect competition in the product market as well as labor market. So dear students, in this theory we have seen how the different economists have given their different views regarding the determination of wages, and actually the modern theory of wage rate, which says that it is the demand and supply which determines the wage rate, is the best among all. Thank you. Dear viewers, till now we have seen how the rent is determined, how wages are determined, and now we are going to discuss how the interest, which is the reward for the services of capital, is determined. Interest is the rate of return on capital. Classical economists distinguished between natural rate of interest, which is the real rate of interest, and market rate of interest. Market rate of interest is the rate at which funds can be borrowed in the market, while the natural rate of interest is the rate of return on capital. Real rate of interest is equal to nominal rate of interest minus rate of inflation. Various theories have been put forward for the determination of interest rate. In this lecture, we will be discussing classical and neoclassical theory of rate of interest. The classical theory of rate of interest refers to the views of Marshall, Cassell, Taussig, Walras, etc. This is also known as the demand and supply theory of rate of interest. It explains the determination of rate of interest through the intersection of demand for savings to make investment and supply of savings. This theory is called the real theory of interest, as it emphasizes the role of real forces like thriftiness, time preference, and productivity of capital. Some classical economists stressed the role of savings, which is supply side, in determining the rate of interest, while some others like Clark and Knight thought the marginal productivity of capital, the demand side, as the most important determinant of rate of interest. Fisher and Bohum-Bauer took into account both demand and supply side. All classical economists assumed full employment in the economy. They differed in their views about the nature of interest. Professor Senior was of the view that savings involved a sacrifice or abstinence, and interest is a price for that sacrifice. Marshall substituted the word waiting for abstinence. In his views, a lender has to postpone his consumption. He has to wait until he gets his money back. To induce people to save and wait, some price has to be paid to them as compensation for making this sacrifice. According to Fisher, lenders must be paid interest because people prefer present enjoyment of goods to the future enjoyment. He laid greater emphasis on time preference as a cause of interest. Along with time preference, he also considered the role of marginal productivity of capital as a factor determining the rate of interest. So, rate of interest is determined by the demand for capital and supply of capital. Now, we will see what is the demand for capital and why it is being done, and what is the supply of capital. Demand for capital is naturally by the borrowers who want to make investments in different fields. So, they borrow in the market, and this borrowings or demand for capital is a function of the rate of interest, and there is a negative relationship between rate of interest and demand for capital. lower the rate of interest, higher is the demand for capital, and higher the rate of interest, lower is the demand for capital. So, demand for capital, and that is shown by the investment schedule or investment curve, slopes downward. So, here we have shown this in figure 1. Investment is shown on x-axis and rate of interest is shown on y-axis. So, there is a negative relationship between rate of interest and investments. When the rate of interest is OR, then demand for capital or for investment is OM, and when the rate of interest falls to OR1, then this demand for investment rises from OM to ON. So, this is the investment curve which is downward sloping, showing the negative relationship between rate of interest and demand for capital. Now, we come to about the supply of capital. So, supply of capital is done by the savers, the persons who can save out of their incomes, they supply these funds. So, savings are a source of supply of capital, and we have taken that income is given. So, at the given level of income, rate of interest and savings are assumed to be interest elastic, and it has been assumed that there is a positive relationship between rate of interest and savings, that higher the rate of interest, higher are the savings, lower the rate of interest, lower would be the savings. So, savings curve slopes upward as is shown in figure 2. So, we have taken savings on x-axis and on y-axis we have shown the rate of interest. So, when the rate of interest is OR1, the supply of capital is OK1. If rate of interest is increased to OR2, supply of capital in the form of savings also increases from OK1 to OK2. So, thus supply curve is upward sloping, showing positive relationship between rate of interest and savings. Now, equilibrium rate of interest is determined at the point where demand for capital and supply of capital intersect each other. This is shown in figure 3. So, in figure 3, saving and investment is shown on x-axis, rate of interest is shown on y-axis. We know investment curve is downward sloping, savings curve is upward sloping, both intersect each other at E, and rate of interest determined is OR, where both the demand and supply of capital are equal. But if rate of interest is kept high, then what happens? We see that when rate of interest is high, supply rises. It is R1B, while the demand for investment is R1A. So, demand for capital or investment is less and savings are more. So, this would lead to fall in the interest rate to OR. And if rate of interest is less, which is OR2, in that case supply or savings decrease and investments rise. So, investments are more than savings by the portion CD. So, because of the rise in investment, rate of interest will again rise to OR. So, OR is the only stable rate of interest. So, here we have shown how the savings and investment determine the rate of interest, and these are the real factors. So, it is also called the real theory of rate of interest. But this theory has been criticized on various grounds. So, what are these points? Number 1 is full employment assumption. This theory is based on the assumption of full employment of resources. But we know in real life there is never full employment of resources. Resources remain unemployed. Or here in this case, savings may be more than the investments. So then it would lead to fall in the rate of interest because of the unemployment of resources. Then there is ignorance of the role of income. Here we have said that the savings are a function of rate of interest. Actually savings depend upon the level of income also. Actually savings are a part of our income. If income is high, savings are high. If income is low, savings are also low. But this theory has taken that income is given and it has ignored the role of income. It says that saving and investment equality is brought about by rate of interest. But actually it is the income which brings equality between savings and investment. When investments are greater than savings, then actually what happens? Because of the increased investment, we have said that there will be increase in the interest rate and equality will be brought. But actually it is the income. How? When investments are greater, this would lead to rise in incomes of the people. And with rise in income, people would be able to save more and saving investment equality will be brought. And on the other hand, if investment is less than the savings, this would lead to fall in incomes and ultimately lead to fall in savings also, bringing the equality between saving and investment. So it is the income which is there to bring the equality between saving and investment, and this role of income has been completely ignored by the classical economists. Then another point of criticism is that savings and investments are not interest elastic. This theory has assumed that savings are interest elastic as well as investments are interest elastic. But it may not be so. Savings not only depend upon rate of interest, it depends upon so many other things. We say in this theory that as the rate of interest rises, savings would rise, but it may not be there in every case. There are persons who want to have only a fixed income in future. So what they would do when the rate of interest rises? They would save less. While in this theory we said that as the rate of interest rises, savings would increase. We have not taken into account other factors. Similarly, investment is dependent not only on the rate of interest. Investor has to see what is the marginal efficiency of capital, what he hopes to get as profits. If rate of interest is low but profitability is comparatively lower, then even at low rate of interest, investments are not going to rise. So savings and investments are not as elastic as has been considered by the classical economist. Then positive effect of consumption has also been ignored. This theory says that because savings are a part of income, they say that if we abstain from consumption, then only savings can be increased or investment can be done only by cutting the consumption. But when the demand for consumer goods rises, there would be more need for investment too, because to increase the consumption, there is a need for capital and for that investment is required. So consumption has positive impact also. It is not necessary that investment can be increased by cutting consumption. Rather, investment will increase by increasing the consumption also. If consumption is rising in the economy, there will be more investments. This part has also been ignored by the classical economists. Then savings are assumed to be independent of investment. It has been assumed that savings are not at all related to the investments. they are independent of each other, but that is also not true. We have shown this in figure 4. When investment falls to II1, then savings curve remain SS, but actually this will not be there. When there is fall in investments, there would be fall in incomes, and this fall in incomes would lead to fall in the rate of savings also. In figure 4, savings and investments are shown on x-axis and rate of interest is shown on y-axis. First, initial investment curve is II and savings curve is SS, and we have the rate of interest as OR. Now, if the investment falls, the rate of interest comes down to OR1. Here we have shown that savings curve remain the same, but actually there will be fall in the savings too because of the fall in incomes. But here savings were assumed to be independent of the investments. There is indeterminateness. This indeterminateness is that we have taken that savings and investments depend upon rate of interest, or they are a function of the rate of interest, and then we determined rate of interest by seeing how the investment curve and savings curve, they intersect each other, and that determines the rate of interest. So, when we are taking savings and investments as function of rate of interest, there at that point rate of interest is the cause and saving and investments are the effect. But when we are talking of the determination of rate of interest, here we have taken savings and investments are the causes and rate of interest is the effect. So, actually what is which is the cause, which is the effect, that is not clear. So, this type of theory is called indeterminate. Then it has ignored the various sources of supply of funds. It has taken only the savings out of the current income, which are the sources of funds. But we know there are various other sources of supply of capital. It can be bank money, it can be dishoarding, etc. It can be disinvestments which have been ignored, or even the past accumulated savings can be used as a source of supply of funds. So, it has taken only the savings of current income. So, that was also wrong on the part of classical economists. So, now we will see what is the other theory, that is the loanable funds theory of rate of interest. This theory is also called neoclassical theory because it was given by neoclassical economists. They are of the view that rate of interest is determined by the demand for and supply of loanable funds. Supply of loanable funds consists of savings out of disposable income, dishoarding, money created by banks and disinvestment. So, this will be the supply, and demand for loanable funds is composed of demand for investment, demand for consumption and demand for hoarding money. So, firstly we take the supply side. In the supply side, savings constitute the most important source of supply of loanable funds. Savings of the individual and households depend upon the level of income, but given the level of income, savings vary directly with the rate of interest. Higher the rate of interest, greater the volume of savings, and lower the rate of interest, lower would be the volume of savings. So, savings curve slopes upward. Dishoarding. Dishoarding of the past accumulated savings is an other source of supply of loanable funds. When people dishoard, the idle cash balances become active cash balances in the present period and add to the supply of loanable funds. At a higher rate of interest, the individuals holding idle cash balances are induced to dishoard more money. At low rate of interest, people will keep more money with them. Dishoarding is interest elastic. This curve also slopes upward. Bank money is also a source of supply of loanable funds. Banks create credit to give loans to the businessmen and industries for investment. Banks would like to lend more at higher rate of interest than at lower ones. Supply curve of bank money too slopes upward. Another source of supply of loanable fund is disinvestment. Depreciation reserves are kept to replace fixed capital on being worn out. When people want to close a firm, they use the depreciation reserves for the supply of loanable funds. Disinvestment increases with the rate of interest. So, the disinvestment curve DI also slopes upward. By the lateral summation of savings, dishoarding, bank money and disinvestment, we get the total supply curve of loanable funds SL, which slopes upward. This we have shown in the figure. Demand for loanable funds is composed of, number one is investment. Businessmen demand for loanable funds for the purpose of making investment. When rate of interest falls, demand for investment rises and vice versa. So, investment demand curve slopes downward from left to right. Consumption demand, people take loans for the purpose of consumption. Loans for consumption purpose are demanded generally for buying durable use goods such as houses, automobiles, refrigerators, television sets, air conditioners, etc. Then there is a demand for hoarding also. People demand for loanable funds for hoarding it. When the rate of interest is low, people want to hoard money to lend it in future when the rate of interest is high. Demand curve for hoarding also slopes downward. By adding up horizontally the investment curve, this saving or consumption demand curve and the hoarding demand curve, we get the total demand curve for loanable funds. And in figure 5, we have shown all these curves and determination of rate of interest. In figure 5, on x-axis we have shown loanable funds and on y-axis we have shown rate of interest. On the demand side, there is demand for capital or loanable funds because of the consumption. This is the DS curve and the other is for hoarding. This line is for hoarding and the third one is for investment purpose, and by adding all these curves horizontally, we have derived demand for loanable funds. So far as the supply side is concerned, it consists of disinvestment curve sloping upward, that is contributing to supply of loanable funds. Then dishoarding, whatever money has been kept idle by the people, that is given as loan when the rate of interest is high. So this is the de-hoarding curve sloping upward. Bank money is also sloping upward, that at higher rate of interest, banks create more credit. They give more loans to business people. And SS is the savings curve. So you see that all these curves are upward sloping. They are the supply of loanable funds, and by the lateral summation of all these curves, we get the supply of loanable funds. Now we see where the supply and demand curve intersect, that is the point E. So that will determine the rate of interest. So OR rate of interest is determined, and actually this is the market rate of interest. This is not the natural rate of interest. Natural rate of interest is where savings and investment cut each other, and you can see here that if we had drawn it, it would have been more than the market rate of interest. It would have been greater. So there is a discrepancy between market rate of interest and the natural rate of interest, and if there is a discrepancy, naturally there will be forces which will be set in, and ultimately they will become equal to each other, then only it will be stabilized. So just as I told you that this is the money rate which is received or which is achieved by the intersection of savings and investment, and this is the natural rate of interest, while the intersection of saving and investment gives the high rate of interest. So now we will see what is the criticism against this theory. The loanable funds theory of rate of interest is an improvement over the classical theory of rate of interest. It has taken into account both real and monetary factors in the determination of rate of interest. However, this theory has been criticized by Keynes and Keynesians on the following grounds. Savings are not interest elastic. I have already told you that savings depend upon so many things. It is not the only interest rate which affects the savings. Actually, they depend on our incomes, and income has been assumed to be given even in the neoclassical theory of rate of interest. Then this theory is also indeterminate, just like the classical theory of rate of interest. Why? Because firstly we have taken the demand for and supply of loanable funds as a function of rate of interest. There again rate of interest is the cause and demand for and supply of loanable fund is the effect. And when we talk of the determination of rate of interest, we say that rate of interest is determined by demand for and supply of loanable funds. There rate of interest becomes the effect. Now again it is not clear which is the cause and which is the effect. So that is also the point of criticism, that this theory is indeterminate. And this theory has also assumed that there is full employment of resources, which is unrealistic, which is not there. So dear students, today we have discussed the classical and neoclassical theory of rate of interest in this lecture. Thank you.
With this one, thank you ma'am, thank you so very much for giving us a very precious session, I would say. I believe that all the students who might have watched the lecture would have benefited, and dear friends, we would be adding benefit for you once again by uploading the lecture on YouTube so that you can access the lecture number of times you wanted. So dear friends, keep watching the lectures, and afterwards if you feel so that you need to give your feedback or ask any question, then you can mail us at info.cc@nic.in. We would be meeting again soon, and soon we would be wrapping up the series as 2 lectures are remaining in the series. So till then, take care, goodbye. Thank you ma'am, thank you so very much.
Welcome.